Wellbeing, particularly in relation to international students. This year I'm going to be leading a number of webinars to do with academic advising and wellbeing. So we had an introduction in September, which I know lots of you came to, which was great, thank you. But it was very much an introduction of different aspects of student support, academic advising, counselling services, the wellbeing unit. And after that introduction, we're now going to kind of spotlight each of those areas once a month for the next few months. So this month it's international students and wellbeing. Next month it's the academic advisors toolkit. In December it's counselling services, because there is so much to share. It's kind of the only way to do it, really. So this session is being recorded, so I hope that's okay. If some of you would prefer to put your video off, that's absolutely fine. And this will be distributed to Seed colleagues after the session. I'm really, really grateful to Spencer Davis and Hannah Armstrong, who are from the Central University Wellbeing team. They'll introduce themselves shortly when they do the presentation, and they've been enormously helpful to me in being able to do this session for you today. So at this point, I'll pass over to Hannah and Spencer.
Thank you very much, Liz. Hannah, if you can start sharing the screen. Yeah, very kind of you, Liz, to invite us along today. Liz and I chatted on Friday about what the event would involve, and she basically sweet talked me into this. But I also have to say, you know, as I said to Liz, I've got a soft spot for C, being an ex A-level teacher myself. So you know, very interested in the work that goes on in this area, and I'm very pleased to be here today. So in terms of what's going to happen in the session today, we weren't quite sure on attendance, so in terms of numbers. So there will be, you know, very shortly a chance for people who are on the call to, I hope, take part in a brief discussion about your feelings and experiences about the topic of wellbeing and supporting international students. Because I'll introduce Karen and Hannah in a second in a bit more detail, but both Hannah and myself, though we are experienced professionals in the area of wellbeing, I don't think we individually would sort of claim to be the experts on international. Karen will blush, I'm sure, as I'm saying this, but we're very pleased to have Karen along today, Karen Badat, because her professional experience has been very much in supporting specifically international students. But you know, I personally, I'm not here today to tell you, you know, the answers, as it were. I'm here really just to kind of like get the discussion going, find out what your experiences are, and hopefully sort of contribute collectively to at the end of this a greater understanding about what the situation is with supporting international students, and how we can perhaps sort of expand and develop our practice. So again, you know, that's a very long introduction, but I've even told you who I am. I'm the head of advice and response, which is an area within the DSE, within campus life. And broadly speaking, the areas that I'm responsible for are central wellbeing. I'm also responsible for a team of specialist mentors who support students with mental health difficulties with academic support. The advice and response bit is a team of caseworkers and a manager in that area who investigate and support students with allegations of sexual harassment that others have allegedly perpetrated against them, hate crime, domestic violence, and also sort of general, which can be quite complex, issues to do with students of concern in terms of mental health, which might lead up to crisis level, which I link up with the counselling and mental health service in respect of that. I also manage the team who are responsible for putting out a lot of the assets that you'll see on the listserv, and who also organise and disseminate the Wellbeing Wednesday stuff. And as I say, I'm very much playing second fiddle, I think. Again, she'll blush, but Karen Badat is a senior international officer. When Karen takes centre stage, I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit more about her experiences at the university. And then also, by no means last but by no means least, at the end will be Hannah, who will tell us in a bit more detail specifically about the kind of step care approach, the teams around supporting international students in a perhaps a bit more broad way. Okay, so can I just check, is the chat enabled, Hannah?
I'll just have a look. Yeah, it is available. Chat's available publicly.
Brilliant. Okay, so Hannah, if you can flip on to the next one. Okay, so when we were designing this, we were looking at getting into breakout rooms because of, I think, you know, we're a nice enough sized group that we don't need to get into breakout rooms to do this. So what I'd like to do really, and I'll get Hannah to stop sharing the screen in a second so I can see you all, but when I came to think about, you know, what does it mean to support an international student, and I was talking it through with somebody, and I actually sort of came to, and I'm not saying this is the end of my thinking, but I actually came to a sort of decision point when I said, actually, perhaps supporting international students is just the same as supporting home students. So what I'd like to do really is just, you know, explore people on the call's thoughts about this. Do you think there's a difference between supporting international students and supporting home students? If it's the same, in what way? If it's different, same question, in what way? So do you want to stop sharing, Hannah? Yeah. Right, so let me put you onto gallery view so I can see everybody. That's better. Okay. So I recognise a few names around the table. Hello to Janice Dodds. The majority of you I've not met before. So I just wondered, would anybody like to, okay, just seen a message from Natalie at the bottom there. Would anybody like to sort of, you know, give a view on what they think about that discussion topic? Are international students the same as home students? If not, why not? Claire.
Yeah, I think by and large, a lot of the support structures we have in place are going to be suitable for both, but I think we have to be sensitive to different cultural and perhaps religious practices. So one of the things I tried to do last year for my students was to have more social activities to try and engage all students, but particularly international students. And one of them, there was alcohol present, and that actually deterred a lot of the international students from going to the event, even though I'd put the event on not just for them, but they were certainly at the forefront of my mind when organising it. So I think we have to be mindful of these different kind of cultural religious practices that might affect the degree to which international students might want to engage in various events like that.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your role, Claire?
I'm a Geography PGT Director. So in geography in the last 2 or 3 years, we've really seen a huge growth in the number of international students on our programmes, particularly students from China. So that's why I'm really interested in looking at ways to support our international cohort.
Okay, thanks for that, Claire. I can see that Matt Sanderson's got his hand raised. Hi, Matt.
Hi, good afternoon, Spencer. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we go on, I'll answer that question. My role, I'm a TA in planning and environmental management, and I quite often take seminar and workshop sessions and occasionally a little bit of lecturing for our real estate module, which has up to 200 students on it. Quite often the majority of whom are, the vast majority even of whom are overseas, and a fair few don't always even understand my dulcet Yorkshire tones. So yes, there's challenges there. I think your question is both, or your supposition is both correct and also in some ways a little bit simplistic, because An overseas expat student, for example, could very well have all the same advantages as, say, a native English speaker from the home, the Shire counties or the home counties. On the flip side, we could have somebody who's a second generation immigrant family, whose families speak another language at home, who has been through a school in I was going to say multicultural, but a minority cultural area of the UK, and who faces the same issues. So it's not necessarily international versus home students, as far as I'm concerned. It's more the backgrounds and the experiences that they bring to the table, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So that essentially what you're saying, Matt, is yes, there are or there may be differences internationally or culturally, but there are also other differences which might be intersectional that we also need to be mindful of. Okay, thank you. Susie, you've got your hand raised.
I was a warden for 5 years of a whole residence at George Kenyon Hall, which has 300 overseas students. And the thing that struck me was that students who've grown up in other education systems in other countries are not necessarily familiar with the concepts of counselling or support. That, they've often grown up in unsupportive education systems or countries. So I had to deal once with a Nigerian woman who, at the end of her master's degree, had realised finally that she wasn't going to get it. She was only going to get the diploma. Nobody had explained to her that 40% wasn't going to cut it. And she said she'd been crying down the phone to her family for the full year and didn't ever think of reaching out, didn't know who to turn to, hadn't grown up in a system where support was available. And there were many other situations like that. And so students who did seek mental health support in the university but didn't find it useful or didn't feel there were any people who represented their cultural background and language. So those
Absolutely.
are my experiences.
Yeah, a couple of points there, Susie. Thank you to follow up on. So, in the case of the first student you described, what was it? You think that she wasn't aware of the support available to her? Okay, so I mean maybe that's a thinking point for us in terms of communication about what is available. Something which struck me actually in conversation with Liz on Friday is the student support website is one that my team owns, and we've got tiles for all sorts of different sections of students, so LGBTQ+, estranged students, care leavers, etc. There's not actually one for international students. I mean, essentially those tiles just lead through to resources which in general are available for everyone, but it's a portal, it's a tile for someone to identify with and go, that's speaking to me. And it actually struck me that we haven't got one for international students. I think we make a bit of an assumption perhaps that even though my statement that we debated was deliberately kind of provocative or one-sided, there is an assumption perhaps that if we just put on the website the links to counselling and the links to student support assets, that everybody equally will be able to access them. That's not necessarily true. Matt, is your hand up again? No? Oh, it's still up from before. Okay. Karen Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm new to the university, but I was doing a lot of academic advising in my old post. I think one of the things is that academic advising sessions are the way that we quite often communicate all of these student support systems, but in a lot of countries, the academic is not treated as the sort of helpful friend, but it's a very hierarchical system, particularly with like Chinese students, Indian students. And so just that first stage of approach, that gateway, is difficult for them. And they may not want to, they don't feel comfortable. I mean, they don't even feel comfortable using your first name. and some of them don't even like to look you in the eye. So to use that as the first point of entry for them to talk about personal issues and issues around maybe failure, which is not culturally acceptable, is maybe not the most ideal way of opening up that offer for them.
Absolutely, Karen. Yeah, and again, I think you make an important point there. You talked about certain cultures, certain nationalities having a different kind of hierarchical view, perhaps, than would be the standard British view. And I think that applies to something is linked to the sort of point that Susie made about from a slightly different angle, different conceptions of counselling. So, for example, you might find certain nationalities might well know exactly where the counselling office is or where the wellbeing resources are, but would not access those because of culturally it's not something which they see as appropriate. They see it, to ask for help is not something which they feel comfortable with. Karen will go into more detail on this later on. Okay. So I think, in general, I think most people would probably arrive at a sort of conclusion that there are some similarities quite clearly. Students arrive wanting a qualification. They have certain, beyond the qualification, certain needs which need to be supported in order to help them to prosper academically. But in terms of, nationalities other than British, as well as different, as Matt pointed out, very clearly there are other differences that we need, intrapersonal differences that we need to be aware of. But there are differences between nationalities which being aware of would help with our ability to support them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Karen Badat. If you can just start sharing the screen again, please, Hannah. Okay, next slide. And next slide. Okay, so Karen, I'll get Karen to introduce herself a little bit first, but Karen is my go-to person on all matters international. Something before Karen does sort of come on, I'm fairly new to the university as well. I've only been here 7 months, I think. 3 weeks of it, I actually went into the building. The rest I've been at the kitchen table. But yeah, something which kind of struck me is that, and Karen can maybe correct me with her talk, but we've got, a lot of people and a lot of very good people who are at the sort of front end of recruiting and welcoming international students, but perhaps not such a kind of demarcated team for supporting students when they're on that learner journey as an international student. But anyway, with no further ado, Karen, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your role in the university, and then we'd love to hear what you've got to say.
Okay, so I'm Karen Badat. I'm a senior international officer in the International Relations Department. As Spencer says, the department that I work in is a recruitment department. So our primary focus with international students is on bringing them to the UK and having them come and study with us and be successful in that study. But we don't have an ongoing relationship with them. We welcome one group in, and then pretty much as soon as they're welcomed, we move our sites onto the next group that are coming in. And I think it is something that does need to be addressed within the university, as where do international students, or where might international students go for more ongoing support? And I think we've sort of found ourselves in this place because we didn't want to problematize being an academic student, being an international student. So we didn't want to provide services that gave the impression that just by virtue of being international, that was bound to cause you a problem, so you would need additional help. So I think we started from the place that Spencer talked about, which is that we thought, well, they are all individual, they are very diverse, they come from different cultures, but just like our home students, they have many different factors that kind of go into their understanding and their background before they come to us. So we didn't want to focus just on that international side, but I think as we've moved through that process, we've started to understand that although they are different and disparate, they do have certain challenges that they pretty much all face. And I guess that's what I'm sort of going to talk about today. So everything I know, I am fortunate enough to know from international students that I have met and worked alongside. So that's the new students that I get to meet, but also, and probably most importantly, are student ambassadors who I work with for quite a long period of time, and who have been kind enough to share their experiences and their stories of being a student at the University of Manchester. And from that, I kind of build up a picture. And then I've started to read a little bit around the subject as well to understand a bit more about the context of what they're telling me. So just to pick up on a couple of things. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I'm just going to say we're not a very large group, so perhaps we can just interrupt if you have anything that you want to say. I can't see many of your faces, so you might have to just speak up, and then I'll, I can address whatever question you have. But if you don't do it as I'm talking, you might kind of forget as we get to the end, or you might need to leave a little bit early and then you won't have asked your question. So please, do interrupt me if there's something that you want to say. Just to pick up on some of the things that were spoken about, one of the issues was around hierarchy and how our international students might perceive their academic members of staff, and also to some extent their support members of staff, as being somebody that you wouldn't go to with a problem and that you wouldn't want to share a problem with. And I think we are all aware of that, and our international students, when they've spoken about this relationship, have often said that they don't want to let the teacher down, they don't want to express vulnerability in front of the teacher. I think for many of them as well, when we describe a service as confidential, that doesn't always mean to us what we think it will mean to them. So they may have experienced what were described as confidential services, but that information did find its way back to their teaching members of staff, and they then found that perhaps their progression was impacted by the things they'd said. So that can often be a nervousness as well. When we've tried to find ways of managing that, particularly with Chinese students, their system tends to be pretty hierarchical, and one of the ways that you can tap into that and use that positively is by using your senior students. So obviously for your undergraduate students, if you've got higher years of Chinese students, those students will naturally want to act as big brothers and big sisters for the younger students. And so they can be enormously helpful in giving messaging around support, in taking away some of that stigma. So sort of explaining what the counselling service is. If they've been to counselling themselves, they might be willing to say that they've gone to this session or they went to a group and they found it really helpful. With the master's students, it's obviously more difficult because you lose the previous cohort, so there's no obvious big brother, big sister. But the way we manage that in other kind of research projects that we've done is to have them write things down. So to have them create a little leaflet or a PDF, whatever, that you can put up that will talk about the experience they've had and explain something about the relationship that we would expect to have with our academics. The other thing which struck me very much with our Chinese students, and a group that I think we don't often realise that they are quite analogous to, is that they are, many of them, analogous to our students who come to us through clearing. So for the majority of our Chinese students, their first intention will have been to stay in China and to study at one of the top level institutions there. And when that isn't possible for them because they don't meet the required mark in the entrance examinations, they then look at coming abroad rather than going to a second-tier Chinese institution. So I think that's important because the majority of them will have had an initial experience of failure, and that that makes them different from a student who's gone all the way through their academic career doing rather well and feeling that everything is, you know, accessible to them and they're going to thrive in this environment, because they have had this difficult experience of not being able to progress in the way that they imagined. And I found that quite a good way of framing their experience. As well with social events, I mean, this is always the problem. We hold social events and we expect them to behave in the way that our home students kind of behave. And again, with Chinese students in particular, one of the things that Chinese students will often do, if you put them in a room with some warm white wine and expect everybody to kind of get on and chat, and they will go backwards and backwards until they're standing against the wall, because it's a Chinese etiquette that you try to include everybody. So you try to have eye contact with everybody, and the only way you can do that is by reversing. When we're at a kind of social gathering, the way we understand the behavior is that we come together in little groups of 2s and 3s, then we chat for a while, and then we sort of say, oh, I've just noticed someone over there, and we wander off and we join another group, and that's how our social events go. But that's not how they would expect to have a social event. They would expect everybody to be included all the time, and therefore that's why they're moving backwards and backwards to keep eye line with everybody. So that again interested me in terms of trying to work out why these social gatherings are often not as successful as we hoped they would be. Can I have the next slide, please, Hannah? Yeah. Thank you. It's very small on my screen so that I can hopefully see your faces. So, but yes, thank you. That's it. So just taking into account that not all international students are the same, and that even when they come from the same culture, they will, just like all of us, there will be outgoing ones, more introverted ones, shyer ones, bolder ones. So they will not necessarily share every trait, even with the people who share the same background and country. I wanted to kind of look at some aspects that they really pretty much all would experience, and framing their experience in terms of these 3 levels of shock, I think might be valuable to you in thinking about how culture, language, and the academic setting contribute to the kind of disequilibrium and discomfort that they might feel in a new space. Some of these things, and certainly this framing aspect, owes itself to the work of Dr. Jeanette Ryan, and I would definitely urge you to look for some of her work. She is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and one of her big motifs is the idea of the canaries in the coal mine, the idea that your international students are really a kind of early warning system for issues and difficulties that probably all the students are to some extent suffering from, but your international students will be the ones whom it affects first. So it's often a really good opportunity to look at kind of teaching practice or the way a class is going if your international students are uncomfortable and not really contributing in the way that you would want to. So we'll have a look at each of these things in turn. Can I have another slide, please, Hannah? I think we've gone on to language shock, haven't we? Is there one before that, Hannah? Sorry.
We were on the culture shock.
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Back on that one.
I have to do a Dame Nancy and really peer at the screen. So in terms of culture shock, I think we've all experienced culture shock. We all kind of know what that feels like. We've all gone somewhere and found that actually, they're all eating at 10 o'clock at night and we're absolutely starving at 5:30, or something like that. And I think the culture shock mostly manifests itself in homesickness, in social isolation, and in frustrated expectations. And Hannah's going to talk a little bit more about how we can help our students manage the culture shock that they feel. But I think some of the things that we know to be valuable and useful are encouraging them to join societies, encouraging volunteering and engaging with their course social events, and also the peer mentors and things that you might have set up. Volunteering is a really, really good one. I think for a lot of years, universities have felt that just sort of pushing students together will initiate friendships, and it'll all be fun. But in actual fact, in order to make a friend, you really need to do something together. And volunteering is an excellent way of doing something together that feels valuable, but also giving you the opportunity to find out more about that other person and start making significant friendships. Our International Society still exists. For those of you who've been around as long as I have, the International Society used to inhabit their own building on the Oxford Road, but they're now part of the Students' Union. But within the Students' Union, they're there on the ground floor with their own offices, and they're still doing the really important work that they've always done with our international students, taking them on trips, running kind of chatting language classes, and just helping them make that transition. Also conversations around the 6 ways to well-being. As we've already said, different cultures have a very different attitude to well-being, and a different attitude as to whether well-being is really part of education, whether it's something that an educational establishment would really be talking about. And also thinking about the student support website that Spencer's mentioned, and the 6 ways to well-being resources that are there. Thank you, Hannah. So in terms of language shock, I don't know whether you can see that. I certainly can't see it, as we've already proved. But the little graphic is, it was created by an American PhD student to try and understand the way that his supervisor spoke to him and what he really meant when he said the things that he did. So when he said things like, "That's a very brave assertion," the student felt, wow, I've said something really amazing there. But what it actually means is, that's an idiotic idea. Never speak to me about it again, which I think is something that we do a lot as British people. We kind of mitigate the slightly more difficult things about what we're saying by dressing them up in a very positive, kind of flowery sort of way, at which point they've lost any meaning for our international students. I think it's definitely worth thinking about using as much plain English as we can, and providing a glossary of the kind of key jargon of your subject area, which will help not only your international but also your home students. The other thing to think about with international students is, for any of us who've ever tried to learn a foreign language, you have to be really very competent in a foreign language before you can express your personality in that language. So I did French as a degree subject, and my French is still pretty good. But for years, all I ever was in France was a nice girl with nice manners, because that's the language I've been taught. I couldn't be sarcastic or funny or even very interesting, because I didn't have enough words to be that. I just had the words to be very polite and very nice. And that is quite distressing, and creates that sort of odd feeling that you've lost a lot of yourself in making this transition to coming to another country. One of my friends, who is an academic member of staff in dentistry, she had a young Chinese student who was with her, and she was talking to him about how he had to really make more effort in practical work that he was doing, and trying to explain this in different ways. And he sat there very quietly and looked down all the time. And right at the end of the conversation, she looked at him and she said, "You're really going to need to pull your socks up." And he looked even further down at his shoes, and obviously thought, "Oh my goodness, not only is my work terrible, but now she's criticizing my clothes." And my friend is actually Russian, so English is not her first language, but still she used this weird set of words which doesn't really mean what we think it means. we say a lot of things, you know, a community of independent learners. What is a community of independent learners? You know, it's a nice phrase, but what does it mean to be an independent learner? We need to tell them exactly what we mean by these things rather than just using the words. And one of the things that we always try and do with international students is check for understanding. If you look at a young Chinese woman and say, "Did you understand that?" her only response can be, "Yes, I did," because she can't say anything else in a situation like that. So trying to use, you know, particularly if you're offering support and you're trying to explain something, trying to use phrases like, "So what is it that we've agreed you're going to do? What are you going to try and do next? What's your priority for the rest of the week?" So encouraging more words out of them would be a really good thing. Can I have the other slide? Thank you, Hannah. Okay. And then I think academic shock. Our new international students are navigating, many of them, very new teaching and learning styles. So we do use passive learning. It's not something that we don't do, but I guess we probably do less of it than some other educational cultures. The other thing that I know many of our international students have found extremely difficult is our disinclination to give the answer. So one of my fabulous Malaysian students who came and did this presentation with me to a different audience, he's very funny when he talks about this. He's an undergraduate student, and for the whole of the first year it just frustrated the life out of him that the academics wouldn't give him the answer. And he started to question whether they might not know the answer, and maybe that was the reason that they wouldn't share the answer with him, because he came from an educational tradition that they had the textbook, and in the back of the textbook were the answers, and so they could think about the answer and then check it with the back of the book. And he just could not understand that what we're trying to do is to get them to think for themselves, to get them to find the answer, that the answer isn't necessarily or always as important as the process of finding the answer. But no one ever told him that that was the point. Eventually it dawned on him that this is what I'm learning, and he was very happy when he realized it. He understood that this was important and this was valuable, but he didn't get it at first, and no one explained it to him. And I think there's that disconnect as well. Just like many of our home students, our international students have been very successful in their home countries. They've shown a lot of enterprise, a lot of initiative, a lot of personality and guts to decide to come to a different country and try and succeed here in another language. And sometimes we can overlook those positive attributes because they don't have the background knowledge and the experiences that we might assume that our home students have, and they don't have the sophisticated language to express it in and to demonstrate, you know, what they know. But they are the most incredible, you know, bunch of people, and they do really want to succeed. I think as well we do need to consider the impact of failure again on our international students. Many of our home students have made great sacrifices and you know, have invested hugely in this future and are very determined to get to the end of it. But for some of our international students, particularly students who might be sponsored, the consequences of not keeping up with your academic work, and even one single failure, can be so devastating that it is terrifying, and they're living with that feeling all the time, which can't be easy at all. So I don't know whether in SEED you have any Bolashak fellows, so that it's a sponsorship arranged by the Kazakh government. But if at any point during your scholarship you receive a mark of less than 60%, even if that's your first year, you have to repay the entire amount of the scholarship. Which for some of them means their parents have to sell their home. You know, it is phenomenally difficult for them to manage that pressure on them, and that that then will obviously cause other issues in your life. So I guess the point of what I'm saying and what I've really learned by working with international students is there is completely no substitute for talking to your students, and your students won't be the same as students in FSC and FBMH and even other schools in SULC. They will have different motivations for coming to study what they've come to study and for being with you. So talking to them and trying to find out from them, you know, what's difficult, what do we really do well, and what don't we do so fabulously that we could change, what was hard for you. And it takes time, and for many of them you need to build a relationship with them that will allow you to have those kind of conversations, and that will allow them to be honest in their kind of responses to you, because again, many of our international students come from cultures where you don't want to upset people, so you're very careful about what you say and you try to couch everything very positively, even though you might not feel that way about it. So I would really encourage you to talk to your own students, really try and find out about their backgrounds and what's been great for them and what's been less fabulous, and just to see them as these canaries, as if they're not thriving, then something is going wrong, probably not just for them, but for other people as well. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thanks, Karen. I mean, I've learned an awful lot from you there, Karen, and hopefully everybody else has found that useful. Just in terms of the double speak illustration that you gave, I don't think actually till I saw them all together there in a group, just how often we don't say what we mean. Kind of reminded me actually of a former boss of mine who generally signed off emails with thanks, but whenever she signed it off with kind regards, you knew that she didn't mean kind regards. She meant you have done the wrong thing and you're in a lot of trouble. So I'm going to hand over for the final bit to Hannah, who's just going to tell us a bit more about the sort of general framework of wellbeing and support that international students can plumb into. Something which I think comes off what Karen has said in the introduction that we did, but worth note again to myself is that I talked earlier on about introducing a tile for international students, but of course international students are not a homogenous blob. By very definition, these people from all corners of the world with very different inspirations, aspirations, experiences, cultures, norms, etc., etc. So as Karen said, getting to know people as individuals as far as possible is probably the best key to any relationship or any support relationship. So Hannah.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So yeah, my name's Hannah and I'm from the student wellbeing part of advice and response. So what we do in the student wellbeing team, it's kind of a mix between proactive stuff, so that's a lot of the wellbeing resources that you will see that we send out every week, Wellbeing Wednesdays, kind of updating the website as well, but then we also have like a reactive side, so we manage the student support mailbox. And we've also got the student wellbeing stand in the library where we get students coming in with lots of different inquiries. So I'm just going to go through the different support services that we have. But I think Liz said that your last presentation was on these support services, so most of you will know what they all are anyway. But I'll just kind of remind everyone of the different places that you can signpost students to. Okay, so we've got the front line. So that's yourself, so that's the school support office and academic advisors. And then we've got the more specialist services, so DAS, Counselling and Mental Health Service, the SU Advice Centre, and then ourselves. And then other support that you can signpost to, so Together All, the student support website, Nightline, and what's that one there? And Res Life if students are in halls. And then some just other support that you can signpost international students to. So the Living Cost Support Fund is now available for international students as well. And then the student support mailbox if you would like to sign up to our listserv for lots of resources that you can signpost international students to. And then we've got the student support website, where we have lots of wellbeing resources which you can signpost home and international students to. But I think there's some particular pages on there which would be quite useful for international students. For example, the settling in page. We've got resources on homesickness, getting to know Manchester. So they're the types of things that you could kind of check out and see which ones would be better for international students. So yeah, that's just kind of a really brief overview of the wide support offering at the university. I think you're on mute, Spencer.
The absolute classic. I've got to do it at least once a week, haven't I? Yeah, I think somebody just put in the chat, can we share these slides? So Liz, I'm sure we'll be able to arrange that afterwards.
Yeah, no problem.
If anybody's got any questions, either that they want to vocalise or put in the chat that they want to ask any of us, we'd be quite happy to answer them, or at least to try. Okay. Perhaps we can export the chat as well. There are a couple of good links that have been put in by people. Karen Badat's put one in, and earlier on, Rashid put another link in, which would be really useful for people to have a look at. I'm sure we'd all agree that we're very lucky to have such a community of international students, and that their presence in our lectures, seminars, support sessions makes working at the university a very enriched experience. And hopefully today the discussions are giving you perhaps a few more things to think about in your work supporting international students. So if anybody wants to email any of us after the event, please feel free. But until then, I'll hand back over to Liz.
Lovely, thank you. If you can just stop screen sharing, brilliant. Can I thank Spencer and Karen and Hannah there for that input, which was really, really useful, and thank colleagues for making the time to attend, especially at the moment when we are all so busy trying to get everything online. So this has been videoed, as I said at the start, so I will send out the video, and I will also send out the PowerPoint slides and the saved chat if I think Laura will be able to get that to me. I suppose at the moment, we all know yesterday the university announced that all the teaching for the next few weeks is going to be online. And I suppose as the Associate Director for Academic Advice and Student Wellbeing SEED, my concern is at this point, especially things like first year undergrads, international students, that no one slips through the net. They really need that contact from us. So I suppose it's like you say, we're frontliners, academic advisors. And I suppose it's how we contact and what we say, particularly with international students, so we don't just get that I'm fine response if they're not fine. And it's great to see those resources which we can be linked to. So again, there'll be another session in a month, and the next session will be the Academic Advisors Toolkit, and then just before Christmas, the session on counselling. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the colleagues for doing that today. So thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.